Do this once, and narcissists reveal themselves. Seem almost untouchable when it comes to manipulation? Like there's something about them that quietly signals, this won't work on me. Meanwhile, others find themselves constantly overgiving, overthinking, feeling emotionally exhausted, or worrying nonstop about how they're perceived. If that sounds familiar, it's not because you're weak or broken. It's often because someone else is subtly pulling the strings. And more often than not, that someone is a narcissist. What most people don't realize is that narcissists aren't as powerful as they appear. Their sense of control depends on very specific emotional reactions from others. Take those reactions away, and the entire dynamic starts to shift. That's why understanding what triggers them is far more powerful than simply understanding how they manipulate. Manipulation explains what they do. Triggers explain where your leverage is. This isn't about fixing them or trying to get them to see the error of their ways. Narcissists don't change because someone explains things better. This is about knowing exactly what destabilizes their control so you can protect your energy, your boundaries, and your sense of self. When you understand what they cannot tolerate, you stop playing defense and start reclaiming your power in real time, in everyday interactions. One of the biggest myths about narcissists is that they crave love or connection. They don't. What they crave is supply, attention, emotional energy, validation, reaction. It doesn't even have to be positive. Praise, admiration, sympathy, anger, frustration, conflict, all of it feeds the same need. As long as you are reacting, engaging, explaining, defending, or trying to be understood, they are being sustained by your energy. That's why the first thing they cannot tolerate is being ignored. Not because they miss you, not because they care, but because silence is starvation. When you stop responding, stop reacting, stop feeding the dynamic, the supply line gets cut. And they feel that absence immediately. Without your attention, their internal sense of self starts to wobble. The illusion they've built depends on reflection. When there's no mirror, cracks begin to form. Ignoring them doesn't require a dramatic confrontation or a grand exit. Sometimes it's as subtle as not replying right away or not engaging at all. It's choosing not to praise them publicly. It's directing your focus towards someone else at a gathering instead of automatically centering them. These are quiet decisions, but they are deeply disruptive to someone who relies on constant validation to function. What's important to understand is that can't handle doesn't always look like an obvious meltdown. Sometimes it does. Sometimes they explode, rage, or unravel in ways that are impossible to ignore. Other times, it's far more calculated. They may suddenly shower you with affection, pull out guilt trips, spread rumors, play the victim, or escalate into threats, including legal or social consequences. The reaction depends on the individual, but the trigger is the same: loss of access. This is why preparation matters. Ignoring a narcissist isn't about being passive, it's about being intentional. When you remove the emotional currency they depend on, the power dynamic shifts whether they admit it or not. They may fight to regain control, but something fundamental has already changed. You are no longer easily accessible. The second thing narcissists cannot tolerate is calm, direct, unemotional truth. They don't mind anger. In fact, they thrive on it. Yelling, arguing, defending yourself, all of that keeps you engaged and emotionally invested. What they cannot stand is grounded, factual statements delivered without emotional charge. Truth presented this way leaves them nothing to work with. Narcissists survive by shaping reality. They exaggerate details, omit inconvenient facts, and distort events to keep themselves at the center of the story. They depend on others to reflect that version of reality back to them. That's why they are drawn to empathetic, accommodating people, those who instinctively smooth things over, doubt themselves, or prioritize harmony over clarity. it's much easier to maintain an illusion when no one challenges it. A calm statement of truth, however, acts like a mirror they can't fog up. It reflects reality as it is, not as they want it to be. And when you don't explain yourself, don't justify, don't argue, and don't take the bait, they're left exposed. There's no emotional hook, no angle to twist, no narrative to hijack. This is deeply unsettling for them because it strips away the performance. There's no audience applause, no dramatic tension to exploit. Suddenly, they are no longer controlling how they're being perceived in that moment. And even more threatening, they realize they're losing access to you. This doesn't require dramatic speeches or confrontations. It can be as simple as saying, "That didn't happen to me," or "That's not how I remember it," or "I haven't experienced that." These statements quietly stop a false narrative from gaining momentum. There's no accusation, no defensiveness, no emotional escalation. Just clarity. Being a truth teller isn't about convincing anyone. It's not about being understood or validated. It's about naming what you see and refusing to minimize it when someone tries to rattle you. That steadiness sends a powerful message. You are no longer available to participate in distortion. And that alone is enough to destabilize their control. The third thing narcissists cannot tolerate is not being treated like the most important person in the room. They expect constant attention, admiration, and emotional prioritization. In their mind, they don't just deserve more than others, they deserve all of it. Your time, your focus, your emotional energy, all of it should orbit around them. Anything less feels like an insult. They don't interpret neutrality as normal. Shared attention doesn't feel fair to them. If they're not being praised, prioritized, or catered to, they experience it as rejection. And because their sense of self is so fragile, that perceived rejection quickly turns into resentment. This becomes especially obvious during events that are meant to celebrate someone else. Weddings, birthdays, graduations, award ceremonies. Moments that are meaningful to you or to others mean nothing to them if they're not the center of attention. All they register is that the spotlight isn't on them, and that is intolerable. When that happens, retaliation often follows. They may create a scene at your wedding, manufacture a crisis right before your birthday, stir up drama during an important milestone. Some will disappear as a form of punishment, using their absence to make the moment about them. Others will escalate, spreading rumors, attempting to embarrass you, or actively sabotaging your relationships or career. It doesn't take much to provoke this response. Simply refusing to make them the center is enough. And that reaction tells you everything you need to know. Their issue isn't that they feel unloved, it's that they feel dethroned. The fourth thing narcissists cannot tolerate is accountability. They don't want to be reminded of what they said. They don't want timelines, follow-ups, or questions about unmet commitments. They especially don't want anyone pointing out the gap between their words and their actions. Accountability disrupts the imbalance they rely on to maintain control. They make promises they don't intend to keep. They talk about change without any follow-through. This isn't forgetfulness or poor communication. It's a strategy. Inconsistency keeps you off balance. When expectations are constantly shifting, you stop expecting anything at all. Over time, you adapt. You lower your needs. You avoid bringing things up. You focus on not being too much. And that's exactly what they're counting on. If you're busy minimizing yourself, you won't notice how little they're actually giving. That's why a simple statement like, "You said you'd be here at 7," or "You promised this wouldn't happen again," feels threatening to them. To you, it may feel neutral, even reasonable. To them, it's an attack on the structure that allows them to avoid responsibility. These statements are clear, direct, and unemotional. There's nothing to twist, no overreaction to point to, no confusion to exploit. They want you chasing clarity, over-explaining, second-guessing what's fair. Confusion keeps them in control. But when you stop apologizing for having needs and simply name what happened without softening it, the balance shifts, and they feel it. The fifth thing narcissists cannot tolerate, and perhaps the most destabilizing of all, is someone who doesn't need them. They thrive on dependency, emotional dependency, financial dependency, social dependency. As long as they believe you can't leave or won't leave, they feel secure. Not secure in the relationship itself, but secure in their control over it. That's what they're protecting. Not love, not connection, leverage. This is why these relationships often start out feeling intense and reassuring. You feel chosen, special, needed. It feels like closeness. But beneath the surface, something else is happening. They're observing, learning where you're vulnerable, figuring out how to position themselves as indispensable so they don't have to rely on you in return. The more dependent you become, the quieter you get. You hesitate to speak up because you don't want to lose support. You avoid setting boundaries because you're afraid they'll walk away. You start explaining your feelings instead of honoring them. You apologize for needing things. You soften your needs to keep the peace. That's the goal. Not just to be wanted, but to be necessary. To be the thing you believe you can't function without. So when that dynamic starts to shift, when you stop asking for permission, when you start saying no, when you no longer feel the need to prove your worth, they sense it immediately. It doesn't matter how calm or kind you are. They feel the cord loosening, and it terrifies them. They'll test you. They may offer help and then punish you for accepting it. They may create crises to pull you back in. Because if you don't need them, they lose their primary means of control. And that is something they simply cannot tolerate. What makes these dynamics so difficult to recognize is how normal they can feel while you're living inside them. From the outside, everything may look fine, even stable. But internally, there's a constant undercurrent of tension. You're always monitoring your tone, your timing, your words. You're anticipating reactions before they happen, adjusting yourself to avoid conflict, disappointment, or withdrawal. Over time, that hyper-awareness becomes your baseline, and you forget what ease actually feels like. When you start to understand these triggers, the first real shift isn't external. It's internal. You stop asking what you did wrong every time something goes sideways. You stop assuming their moods, outbursts, or silence are reflections of your worth. Instead, you begin to see them as signals of something else entirely, a disruption in their sense of control. That realization is grounding, because once you see that their reactions are about power, not love, the spell begins to break. Ignoring them, speaking calmly, refusing to center them, holding them accountable, and no longer needing them are not acts of aggression. They're not punishments or games. They are boundaries in action. And boundaries are intolerable to narcissists because boundaries define where their influence ends. This is why their behavior often escalates when you start changing. Not because you're being cruel, distant, or unreasonable, but because the familiar buttons they used to press no longer work. When manipulation fails, they don't suddenly become reflective. They adapt. They intensify. They shift tactics. That doesn't mean you should panic or retreat. It means you're doing something effective. One of the most important things to remember during this stage is that you do not owe them emotional access. You don't owe them explanations, reassurances, or chances to rewrite reality. Narcissists thrive on reaction. Any emotional response, even pain or frustration, signals that they still matter, that they still have leverage. When you stop providing that feedback loop, even quietly, they feel destabilized. This doesn't mean they disappear. Some will try harder. Some will become charming again. Others will become colder, more punitive, or more dramatic. Some will attempt to recruit others into their version of the story. None of that is random. It's all designed to pull you back into the old dynamic where they felt secure. Your job is not to convince them of anything. Your job is to stay anchored in what you know. Clarity, not confrontation, is what protects you here. A common misconception is that holding boundaries requires becoming harsh or emotionally closed off. It doesn't. Strength in this context is quiet. It's consistent. It's the ability to stay steady even when someone is trying to provoke a reaction. Narcissists don't know how to respond to calm consistency when it doesn't benefit them. Your power does not come from changing their behavior. It comes from changing your availability to it. When you stop reacting the way they expect, the entire script collapses. And without a script, their confidence falters. They may still perform, but the performance loses its grip on you. You might also notice something unexpected as you continue holding your ground. Other relationships begin to feel different. When you're no longer shrinking, over-explaining, or managing someone else's emotions, your presence changes. You become clearer, more grounded, more self-directed. That shift can feel uncomfortable at first. Growth often does, especially if you've spent years being valued for how accommodating or flexible you were. Stepping out of that role can feel disorienting, even lonely. But that discomfort isn't a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're no longer betraying yourself to keep the peace. Not every narcissist reacts the same way. Some are loud and explosive. Others are subtle, passive-aggressive, or quietly controlling. Some operate through charm, others through guilt or fear. But regardless of style, these triggers strike the same nerve. They all point back to the same core issue: loss of control over how they are seen and how others respond to them. When their approval no longer defines you, when their silence doesn't scare you, when their anger doesn't dictate your choices, their leverage disappears. And without leverage, the relationship either transforms completely or begins to collapse. That outcome is not a failure, it's information. Many people stay stuck because they're waiting for closure, accountability, or an apology that never comes. But closure doesn't come from a narcissist. It comes from understanding the pattern and choosing not to participate in it anymore. You don't need to announce this change. You don't need to justify it. You live it. You respond less. You engage differently. You protect your time and energy. You stop negotiating boundaries that were never meant to be negotiated in the first place. This process also requires compassion for yourself. If you've spent years people-pleasing, doubting your perceptions, or minimizing your needs, that wasn't weakness. It was adaptation. You learned how to survive in an emotionally unsafe environment. Now you're learning something new. And learning takes time. Guilt may surface as you stop overfunctioning. That guilt doesn't mean you're hurting someone. It means you're disrupting a system that depended on your self-abandonment. Let it pass without obeying it. Over time, something remarkable happens. The things that once triggered anxiety lose their charge. Their moods stop controlling your nervous system. Their approval stops feeling necessary. Their reactions stop defining your worth. That's the real shift. That's where freedom begins. Narcissists want to be admired, needed, and centered because without those things, they're forced to face an internal emptiness they cannot tolerate. But that emptiness is not yours to manage. Your responsibility is to your own clarity, your own stability, your own life. When you understand these triggers, you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "Why does this threaten them so much?" And that question changes everything. Because the answer is always the same. It threatens them because it takes their power away. If you want to go deeper into this, the next video on your screen breaks down how narcissists test your boundaries the moment they feel control slipping, and what to do when those tests show up. Click it now and keep building the awareness that protects your peace.